Thank you for joining us for session 2 on this teaching on Is the Hand of God Evident in America's History? Was there a providential work of God in founding this nation and keeping this nation and directing this nation, especially in its early days? So we've got kind of two goals that we're looking at as we go through this. One, to show you that in American history, there is no other explanation for the founding and development of America than the providential hand of God. Second, to show you that some of the modern-day historical interpretations of American history are not grounded on solid historical research. And some people may just be informed, or some people may be intentionally misleading. So I want to make sure we have truth regarding American history, so from that truth we can determine that God was involved in our nation's founding and our nation's development. Now, the simplest place to look as we're on a timeline for American history is to start with Columbus and the discovery of the Americas. In 1492, we know he sailed here with the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria through uncharted waters. It was the first time in world history that anyone had crossed the Atlantic at this latitude, the one that Columbus did. And when he landed here, got off the boat, got on the ground, he kissed the ground, and he planted a cross where he landed. And he thanked God for the safe voyage, and he christened the island San Salvador, which means Holy Savior. And there is a painting that hangs in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. There are 8 paintings, portraits, that depict phenomenal events in America's early history, and Columbus kneeling there, calling his sailors over there to pray. That is one of the 8 paintings that is there. It's called The Landing of Columbus. If you visit the rotunda, you can see that painting there. Now, for 5 centuries, we have celebrated Columbus as a hero. But in recent years, the portrait of Columbus has been changed. It has been changed into someone who is somewhat of a genocidal villain because of some so-called atrocities that he did to native peoples. And they're bringing down his statue, and they're changing his day, Columbus Day, to Indigenous Peoples Day. Too many of today's narratives fail to give the complete story of his encounters and relationships with the early American inhabitants. For example, on Columbus's voyages to America, he interacted with 2 principal tribes, the first one being the Taino. And he viewed these as a very kind and gentle people. As a matter of fact, in Columbus's words, he says these were the best people in the world, openly affirming, again in his words, a better race there cannot be. And Columbus eventually advocated for their full equality, citizenship, and civil rights. Nobody's probably ever told you that before. But there was another tribe called the Caribs, the root word for Caribbean. They were the mortal enemy of the Taínos. The Taínos warned Columbus of this tribe because they enslaved people, and we have historical evidence that they cannibalized people they enslaved. The Caribs, also known as the Canids, which we get our word cannibal from. Thus, not every indigenous tribe was a peace-loving, kind people. Not every indigenous tribe was a noble savage. Some of the tribes here were just that, not noble, but savage. History tells us that Columbus is returning back to Spain to bring more colonists. And as he's leaving, one of the 3 ships runs aground, so much so that it cannot be trusted to navigate the oceans anymore. So the people on that boat are left here in the New World. And while he leaves, this group is attacked by the Caribs, and they kill them, and they cannibalize the men. They enslave the Taino women. Upon his return with 17 ships and 12,000 colonists, which is his second voyage to the New World, Columbus finds the remains of the people he left behind. And at the behest of the native allies, he sets out for the Carib Islands. And in one Carib village, Columbus found the huts where the Caribs had enslaved the Taino women, whom they raped, produced children, and those children the Caribs cannibalized. So on Indigenous Peoples Day, are we celebrating that tribe? When you hear also that Columbus enslaved native people and carried them back to Spain, once again, the whole story is not being told. Some of the cannibalistic Caribs were captured and carried back. But what most modern history will not tell you is that from the Taino tribes, several volunteered to travel back with Columbus to Spain. One actually becomes a royal member of the Spanish court. Another took Columbus's last name and faithfully traveled with him for several years to help him be an interpreter to the islands that he visited. And it's also important to note that at this point in time, before any European contact or landing on the New World, it is estimated that anywhere from 20 to 40% of the natives in the tropical New World are enslaved by other native tribes. This puts the New World native people, the indigenous people, as on par with any other slave cultures in the history of the world. Now, there's a thing when you study history that you've got to be aware of. It's called presentism. And if you take a history course or if you decide to major in history, this will be one of the things that you find out is not a good thing in your historical research. Presentism is judging past history by present standards. You always have to put history within context of what the culture and the practices were of that time. I'll give you a good example of this. There was one point in time in medical practice where bloodletting was the standard of medical procedures, in which they would take leeches out of a jar, put the leeches on the human body, and the leeches would suck the blood out of the people. Now, we know today that is just totally ridiculous, but yet we do not condemn current day medical practice. We don't condemn doctors and hospitals because of past medical practices. That would be presentism. Now, on a more specific example related to our topic, a large number of native people did suffer and die as a result of the exploration of European people coming to the New World. But it was not because of intentional force or violence. The Europeans brought with them diseases that the native people did not have an immunity to. But here's the thing you have to remember when you study history. Medical science had not developed an understanding of how germs were transmitted until between the 1850s and the 1920s, not until 350 years after Columbus. So you can't point a finger and blame the European explorers for this because they had no idea what they were doing when out of kindness they gave a blanket to somebody in the New World. And by that same token, there were also diseases that the Europeans came and were exposed to that the native indigenous people were already immune to. So this argument works both ways. Now, there's another side note to the history going on here. The Crusades for the Holy Lands are happening at about the same time as Columbus and his discovery of the New World. There were 8 Christian crusades into the Holy Land. There were more than 500 Muslim incursions and battles into the Holy Land. The Muslim Crusades started 300 years before the Christian Crusades and lasted another 300 years after the Christian Crusades. The Muslim targeted lands that were held either by Christians or by Jews, which were basically all the lands at that point in time around the Mediterranean. It was Spain, Greece, France, Italy, and also Jerusalem. Now, Columbus was particularly concerned about Jerusalem. He requested, and I quote, that all the profits of this my enterprises may be sent in the conquest of Jerusalem. So what he wanted was the money that he made, the captain's share, the lion's share of the discoveries in the New World. He wanted that to help fund the protection of Jerusalem and the return of Jerusalem back into the hands of the Jewish people. Now, there's another side note regarding Columbus and all of this. Pardon me. Records show that the natives on these islands didn't place the same value on gold that the Europeans did. So they would gladly exchange or give gold to some of the colonists who they would readily accept, but Columbus put a caveat on there. They couldn't just accept the gold without giving something in return that was of similar value. Now, all of this said, how does it tie in to the providential hand of God in American history? As we begin to look specifically at the golden thread that weaves throughout American history, it's interesting to note that while Columbus receives credit for the discovering of the New World and opening the Western Hemisphere up to European colonization, neither he nor the Spaniards or anyone else actually colonized the area that we know today as the United States of America. This is providential. For at that time, Spain practiced both civil and religious oppression. For example, the same Spanish monarch that funded Columbus's venture to America is the same Spanish monarch that established the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. It is also the same Spanish monarchy that expelled the Jews from Spain in 1492. But in God's perfect timing, God saw to it. The colonization of America did not begin until after the Reformation, which occurred in 1517. You see, England came to the exploration and colonization party later than all the other European countries. Spain and other countries had already been doing this for some time, and these other countries were exploring the New World. If England had done it at the same time, America would have gotten the worst of the European colonization. America would have gotten the worst part of European religion and not the better part that occurred after the Reformation. By the time European and English attention is finally turned back to America, a century after Columbus's discovery, the Reformation was at its height. And it was primarily the colonists that came out of the Reformation thoroughly schooled in the concept and philosophy of the Reformation, that the Bible is the key source of our beliefs. It was those that populated the lands in America. Because the Reformation strongly urged a return to the teaching of the Bible, America substantially differed from the other relationships of those nations between the ideal of church and state. What had become common in Spain and Portugal and France and Anglican England was not what landed in America. In short, the providential hand of God ensured that the civil government in America would not control religion. It also ensured that an oppressive religion would not control America. God held his hand back long enough for the European colonization of what we know as America to be influenced greatly by the Reformation. America most likely would have become corrupt and tyrannical as the rest of these countries and corrupt as the rest of the colonies that you see in the southern part of the hemisphere. America's founding openly acknowledged the difference that existed between the Christianity practiced in most of Europe and the Christianity that would be practiced in America. The American Revolution, for example, produced liberty. The French Revolution produced the guillotine. That's the difference you see in the time frame. The people that God put his hand on, the people to wait until after the Reformation to be here in America. The fact that America remained free from colonization for more than a century after Columbus's discovery is an early indication of the golden thread of God's providence that weaves itself through American history. He is an on-time God.